Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined by Scott Pianowski. Scott, I don't know about the weather up in your neck of the woods, but it is a soggy mess here. The Mets are figuring out that, if you cancel all your games, you can't lose them. And so that's a benefit. But yeah, it's a little damper on baseball season here with so many rainouts right now.
Yeah, that's the only thing that could stop the Tigers from storming to, like a 15-0 start is the rain in New York. And
it's true.
We're both Red Sox fans. They've opened up on the West Coast. And that used to be more common maybe a generation ago, that just, okay, cold weather team, you're playing in Anaheim, you're playing in Oakland, you're playing in Los Angeles, whatever it is. And I know everybody wants the specialness of opening day, and maybe opening day isn't as fun for some cities if it's a week into the season, but yeah. I'm all about practicality. I say let's play indoors, let's play in the warm weather, and we'll have plenty of time to get baseball in Chicago, baseball in New York, baseball in Detroit, wherever it may be, baseball in Boston. We can get to that when the weather is more agreeable.
Yeah, you look at the schedule and you're like, oh, this sucks. They don't have a home game for 2 weeks. And then you're like, oh, what sucks more is you just keep getting rain and rain and rain. And like the Tigers, they came to New York, they played one game. They're going to get rained out of the next two. And then they're going to be gone because, and who knows, I'm sure they'll find a way to make it up. But, that's kind of a bummer road trip for them, a bummer homestand for the Mets.
Unfortunately for the Cincinnati Reds, it couldn't rain hard enough to keep Bryce Harper down last night.
No, could not.
Wasn't it just, this is the easiest low-hanging fruit in the world. But, Bryce Harper 0 for 11, that was a fun story. Smashes 3 home runs of all different trajectories. They're all no doubters. And, I tweeted that in an era, the Braves are loaded, the Dodgers are loaded, and the Rangers are, are stacked, and the Orioles have every prospect you want, pretty much, it feels like. Yeah. But I'll still take a Bryce Harper bat right up there with anybody, even when he strikes out. He fits. Can you think of a player who fits his city and the ethos of his city better than Bryce Harper? I mean, he's go, go, go all the time. He wears it on his sleeve, and that's how the Phillies fans are. I mean, it's a perfect.
Yeah. I did the blurb for that was one of my games last night over on the Player News side for Rotoworld, so you could check that out. But I was like, obviously we didn't have much to be worried about when he went 0 for his first 3 games, and that's just we're dealing with small sample sizes here. We want to react to certain things, and Scott has some of his waiver wire rules that we'll talk about later on in the show. And we'll also look at some, tasty weekend matchups we want to take advantage of. And these are things like we want to capitalize on some of this stuff early, but we don't want to do that by totally, overreacting to really small sample sizes in players where we have long enough track record to deal with, right? We know who Bryce Harper is. There wasn't a lot of worry, but, there's some worry. But even like, Chris Crawford and I did the Q&A on the, the NBC Sports YouTube page yesterday, and people were like, should I move on from Jordan Walker? Like, he's had a really bad start to the year. And it's like, just don't. I mean, I know we don't have the track record with Jordan Walker. We have 1 season, but it's been 5 days, 6 days for some guys. Like, let's let it settle. If you really want to move some guys to the bench and let like a guy who's swinging a hot bat go into your lineup, fine, whatever. If the worst thing is you get burned because you have, the 2 home runs on the bench, so be it. But you can't really, we want to churn the low level guys on our roster, not guys like Jordan Walker off our roster in the first weeks of the season.
Well said. I want you to be intelligently proactive. And also, man, it's just so great to see Chris Crawford back where he belongs doing Rotoworld stuff. So welcome back, Chris. And it's just, I look forward to reading your work back under the Rotoworld umbrella. Let's we got some injuries and stuff to break down. Let's give the people what they want.
Yeah, and we got an update actually just today when the surgeons went in. So Josh Jung, the Rangers third baseman, fractured his wrist. When the surgeons went in to perform the surgery, turns out they apparently found more extensive damage than they thought. The original timeline was 6 weeks. Now the Rangers are saying he's going to be out for 8 to 10 weeks. When a team says 8 to 10 weeks, I tend to think of it as 10 to 12 weeks just to be on the safe side. So that could be 3 months without Josh Jung. If you are in a format like an NFBC format with no IL spots, can you justify holding Josh Jung for 3 months, knowing that it's a fractured wrist? So we don't even know if he's going to have his typical power right when he comes back. He might not ever have it back this year. He might not get it back till August, September. I feel like in a 12-team format without IL spots, I think I have to move on.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm completely there yet. It would depend on your roster, of course, and every question we ask is always contextual. But he'd be, once the injury started to pile up, it would be hard to hold a guy like that. I love to trade, and again, these are human beings. I don't mean to be coy about it or cavalier about it, or glib about it, whatever word you want to use, rather than thesaurus on your own. But I would love to trade a player like this at a fraction of his value and get something, and then not have to deal with the maintenance and the storage and all that stuff. You can't do that in NFBC format because, as you said, and I say this all the time, injury optimism is not your friend. When you hear a timeline, hear the high end of the timeline, not the low end. And then we can't assume when he comes back, is he healthy right away? Does the power return right away? It might be one of these things we're talking about Young next year. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that injury and he came back. He wasn't really the same guy. I mean, Bryce Harper, we talked about earlier, but it took a while for him to look like Bryce Harper at the end of last season. He didn't hit the ground running when he first returned from that injury, although he was ahead of schedule. So it's no fun to say this. You have to be pessimistic about injuries like this. And there are certain situations I could see you cutting him. I would try not to, but if you need to be more flexible now, you need to have a bench that has more liquidity to it. I totally understand.
Yeah, I don't know. On an IL league, I'm trying to hold him as long as I can for sure. The Rangers called up Justin Foscue. He's not starting today, Wednesday. He didn't start Tuesday. Josh Smith is starting again today. So I think if there was any optimism on Justin Foscue, I think it's muted by the fact that he's been up for 2 days and hasn't started in either one of them. Now he might get playing time. Chris Crawford, who we just mentioned, does extensive prospect work. He said yesterday on the Q&A on the YouTube channel that he thinks Foscue is going to be a better real life player than fantasy player, that his skills are fine, but there's nothing overly enticing. And I take that, I think that Chris knows what he's talking about. I do believe that Ezekiel Duran will find more playing time. He is, playing third base today, Wednesday. He got a day off yesterday, but I think, he can move all over the field. He had been playing some first base. So I think Duran over the next 3-ish months becomes a little bit more of a Willie Castro type of, bench hitter who you can move all around and will give you a little bit of everything. I don't think he's a must roster, but I think he's intriguing if you need, a guy who doesn't have any elite skills, but a lot of decent ones who can contribute across the board a little bit.
Yeah, he might be the better fantasy player than real life player because he offers some category juice, kind of a free swinger. His OPS plus was slightly over 100 last year. It's ultimately going to come down to playing time. We know the Texas lineup is a lineup we want to invest in, but you need to know that somebody's in the lineup at least 85% of the time or more for them to really have mixed league value.
Yeah. We got another hamstring injury for Alek Thomas of the Diamondbacks. He's going to the IL. Alek Thomas wasn't really rostered in a lot of leagues anyway, even though I was hoping he made some swing changes in the offseason. I was hoping to see that kind of carry over. But interestingly, Jake McCarthy is now starting in his place. Jake McCarthy is somebody who at the end of the 2022 season was on a lot of fantasy rosters because of that speed. He lost his job in 2023, and some people had spent early draft picks on him. Now he's on the waiver wire in almost all league types. Are you willing to pick up Jake McCarthy now that we've kind of acknowledged he's a little bit of speed only, but he seems to be getting the regular run of playing time while Alek Thomas is out?
Yeah, as you said, speed's really the only skill he can hang his hat on. 49 steals against 7 caught stealings the last 2 seasons, but his career slugging percentage is just 379. His batting average collapsed last year. I do like the fact that he tried to steal a base yesterday. He was caught, but I want him running as much as possible because if he's not running, it's one thing to run chip in. He needs to run aggressively to have fantasy value. He's going to bat in the bottom of a decent Arizona lineup, and I can't guarantee you the average will help. He'll occasionally chip in with a home run. He's not a power guy. I'd prefer to wait and see on McCarthy, and if I get beat on him, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think in an NL only, you can react pretty quickly because it seems like he'll get regular playing time. But in other formats, I agree with you. Let's wait.
I have him in Tout. I did activate him this week in Tout Wars. Where the NL only thing. The thing with NL only or AL only is anybody who gets any playing time is immediately valuable.
Yes.
Even
For
if
sure.
somebody, I've Connor Joe in NL tout, the fact that he may play 4 or 5 times a week, I'm like jumping up and down, because that's important. And only the calculus is totally different.
Right. I picked up Tyler Freeman at the end of my draft, and now I'm like, he's an everyday center fielder. It's amazing. Another signing, though, the White Sox reunited with Mike Clevinger. I'm looking for a timeline right now. He doesn't have any options, but obviously he's not yet been promoted or added to the active roster. The White Sox were a team we talked about that didn't really need a fifth starter for a while. They don't need a fifth starter until I believe it's the second week of April. So right now, the thought had been that Nick Nastrini would get called up, but I have to imagine that Michael Clevinger is going to start as the fifth starter for the White Sox when they need one in a couple of weeks. He was pretty solid for them last year in his age 32 season. Pitched 131 in a third innings with a 3.77 ERA, a 123 whip. The strikeout rate really wasn't there. He had a 20% strikeout rate, 12.8% K minus BB. Bad team. We've talked about all of this. Any interest in Clevinger?
He'll need to pitch his way onto my roster. The last 2 years, Padres, White Sox, he pitched to a FIP of 4.61. The strikeout rate has plummeted, as you said, and he's got good control. It's not elite control. He really needs elite control to survive with that strikeout rate. Age 33 season, bad team. If he hits the ground running or has a run in the middle of the year, maybe I stream him because we know that division is full of the soft landings. Unfortunately, he can't pitch against his own team, which is like really the one you want to pitch against. But he's on the waiver wire, and he'll need to pitch his way off it.
Yeah, a couple of former prospects that I just wanted to mention here, just to see if there's anything left in the tank. The Dodgers claimed Taylor Trammell, the outfielder Taylor Trammell, off waivers from the Mariners. Anytime the Dodgers are claiming somebody who used to be a renowned prospect, it obviously makes your spidey senses tingle a little bit. What do they see? This appears to be connected to Jason Hayward, who had some MRI on his back, and the back scans came back negative. So I guess that means it's good news. But apparently today is the day that the Dodgers will decide if they're going to put him on the IL or not. And then if they do, he had been starting every game versus right-handed pitching. So that could open up a spot for Taylor Trammell to do that in the short term. And then the Pirates traded for catcher Joey Bart, who was waived by the Giants. We assume that Joey Bart will back up Henry Davis, and this might end the Yasmani Grandal experience in Pittsburgh, which started out, I guess, kind of well, and then ended with a foot injury and then a minor league designation, and who knows. Any interest in either Joey Bart or Taylor Trammell?
Again, they'll need to play their way off the waiver wire. For me, I'd forgotten how highly touted a prospect that Trammell was, although looking at his minor league stats, the one thing that jumped out is that he ran a lot. But 271, 369, 436 slash in the minor. It's good. It's not. I know that one of the reasons why he showed up on a lot of these scouting pages is because he was a first round pick, and that's always going to get factored into their initial upside projections. But the Dodgers, the one thing the Dodgers need to do, and I don't know Trammell well enough to speak to this, but their defense is the one part of their team that's subpar. So if Trammell can be a plus defender, right. So you talked about replacing Hayward, right? We know that that's really where Hayward has hung his hat his whole career, is that he's been a frustrating offensive player. He started so well with Atlanta, had I think that one good season in St. Louis, but he's for the most part been a ground ball machine and a below average offensive player, but obviously fantastic on defense. So maybe Trammell fits that suit that way, because the Dodgers, for all the embarrassment of riches they have, how deep their lineup is, and how, man, if they had everybody healthy, they wouldn't have enough spots to pitch everybody. It's just ridiculous how talented that team is, but you still have to convert batted balls into outs, and that's one thing this team doesn't do very well. All that said, if Taylor Trammell's making nice catches in right field, that's not going to lead to fantasy value. So I would love it. We love post hype. There's some post hype sleepers I'm proactive on. There are other post hype sleepers who need to play their way into my line of sight. That's how I feel about Trammell.
I agree with you here as well. I mean, if Hayward does go on the IL, I could see adding Trammell again in like NL only formats, because if he's going to start for the Dodgers even for 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, why not? I mean, just being in that lineup, what are the, what happens if things break well? I'll take my runs and RBIs, whatever. Taylor Trammell is a guy, like if you look at his scouting grades, and remember scouting grades are out of 80, he has a 55 raw power, 70 speed grade. So this is a power speed guy who has never hit well enough at the major league level. The strikeout rates when he's gotten chances in the major leagues are way too high. If the Dodgers can help him make even an average amount of contact and he starts to make use of that power speed, yeah, he could be interesting, but that's a lot of ifs on a team that platoons anyway. So I'd be staying out of this unless, again, I'm in a really deep format. And then interestingly, I just had to note, like, Trevor McGill went on the IL. First of all, Tyler McGill, also the Mets starter, went on the IL with a shoulder injury. And the Mets are going to call up Mike Vassell, who's one of their pitching prospects. He's going to start if the Mets ever play a game again. And
would anybody complain if they didn't? I guess Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor managers would be a little bit frustrated. JD Martinez would be stuck in a time warp, but I don't know.
And I'm actually looking right now. The rumor, it's a rumor that they're going to call up Mike Vassell. It has not been announced yet, obviously, because they haven't played games. But the Mets will call up Vassell or Jose Budo, or they'll call up somebody. Nobody who I'm running to pick up. The name to watch for the Mets is Christian Scott. He looked really good in the preseason. He is probably their best pitching prospect, and I think there's a chance that he is up in that rotation by May or June and starting the rest of the year. So if you start to hear the name Christian Scott, I would react. Otherwise, I would not be reacting too much. But Trevor McGill, the Brewers reliever, who's Ty Lore's brother, also went on the IL, the concussion IL, because apparently he had food poisoning and fainted in a phone store and hit his head and suffered a concussion, which is a wild story. I just want to point it out because he was pitching the highest leverage innings in the Brewers bullpen over the first weekend. And so Uribe was getting a lot of the saves, but McGill was clearly trusted to get those high leverage outs. So just keep an eye on that, because if it is now just Piamps and Uribe in the bullpen and the Brewers have to get really tough outs in the 7th or 8th inning, don't be surprised if that then becomes Uribe getting those outs and it leaving some saves for Piamps, because they are now without a trusted reliever in the back of that bullpen. So I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying keep an eye on the Brewers bullpen usage while Trevor McGill is out, because it may shift some of the dynamics in those high leverage situations.
Well said. Nothing to add.
We're going to get to some of the things that Scott likes to do when he is deciding whether to pick somebody up on waivers or not. But before we do that, you can get your weekdays started with Bet the Edge. Join Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick as they break down the MLB, the NFL draft, the NBA, and much more. New episodes drop every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. And you can find it in podcast form wherever you download and subscribe. So whether you're looking to get involved in the awards markets, player props, futures, check out Jay and Drew for more insight. That's Bet the Edge on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. So we've talked a lot about waiver ads and what to do in the first weeks and all of that. You have some waiver rules that you like to live by. I have a couple that I say live by. I try to subscribe to. So we just wanted to do a quick segment here on, let's call it Scott's waiver rules. So what are your waiver rules?
For sure. And understand that, every league's different. You know your league better than we do. And these are, again, I want you to be intelligently proactive. Doesn't mean that everybody who checks these boxes will be a pickup, but I think we've talked about this before. The rule of 10, this was Mike Salfino's rule originally. Guy gets 10 strikeouts, you want to pick him up. And the name that percolated for me was Brady Singer, because not only did he strike out 10 guys at his first start, but he's a pitcher with a pedigree. What is pedigree? Once highly regarded, maybe a first-round pick, thought to have an interesting ceiling, and he gets the White Sox in his Friday start. Mm-hmm. And he gets, again, I'm going to bang on this AL Central as long as I can do it. So 10 strikeouts mean a lot more to me today than they did maybe 10 years ago or in the beginning of the fantasy internet era, which I guess goes back to like 1999, 2000, something like that, where guys don't pitch as long. So it's harder for them to get 10 strikeouts. So it's more impactful to me and more notable to me when they do that. If I'm looking for really, if you can check two of these boxes. One, did the guy get 10 strikeouts? Yes. Two, is his next start against somebody who looks attackable, or is there at some point in the recent history where we're excited about this pitcher? In this case, Singer checks all three boxes. He's an automatic ad for me, but I want your ears to perk up when you see those 10 strikeout games.
Yeah, I agree on that. I mean, I think you can't, that's a pretty good barometer. And I think adding these guys and at least putting them on their bench if they don't have a great matchup is something you can always do. Like, Garrett Crochet in the first start, most people viewed him as an auto ad, and I was super happy to add him, but I wasn't starting him against the Braves. Obviously, he crushed the Braves last night. Maybe, it was freezing cold weather that had something to do with it, but he looks really good. And I would rather have added him and put him on my bench and said, I'm not going to play him against the Braves, and then just been like, oh man, he was so good against the Braves, than not adding him, expecting that he's not going to do well against the Braves. All of a sudden he does do well against the Braves, and I have some FOMO from that. I also like to look at if a guy has shown 2+ pitches, I like to add him. I think that to me suggests the depth of an arsenal and the idea that I could get strikeouts with that even if the results aren't there early on, I can keep a pitcher like that on my bench. So you may have a preference in deciding what makes a plus pitch for you. You may want 2 pitches that have above average swinging strike rates. So you may want to see a guy who has 2 pitches that get like at least 15% swinging strike rates or not. You may want to see a stuff plus number, right? Stuff plus individual pitch types, 100 is the average for stuff plus. So you may want to see 2 pitches that have over 100 stuff plus. You may use pitcher lists, PLV metric, and you may want to see 2 pitches that grade out really well on PLV, whatever it is for you that you trust the most. I think a pitcher that has 2 quote unquote plus pitches will generally find success. And so if that's not happening early, I'm willing to take a chance on those guys and put them on my bench and see what happens in regards to that. And that's been something, that we've seen some success in the past. I'm thinking of it also right now with like Brian Bayo, who's showcasing 2+ pitches, and the results haven't really been there, but he's not on waivers, but he is a guy who people drafted and are now like, I don't know, are we going to see that level? It's like the underlying skills are suggesting that the pieces are there. The consistency is not, but I'm willing to bet on the pieces and hope that we find the consistency.
And even if you don't get the 10 strikeouts, I always scream out, walks and strikeouts will tell you so much of what you want to know. And you mentioned Crochet, 2 starts. He's got 1 walk and 16 strikeouts. And this backs up to a spring training where he had 1 walk and 14 strikeouts. So and actually had an unusually high level of competition. A lot of times those spring stats are built off really bad opponents. That was not the problem with Crochet. So we're looking at about a month, maybe 6 weeks of action. He's got 30 strikeouts and 2 walks. Now we know the team is horrible. I'm curious if you've done any deep dive to Crochet. He's done it twice now. He just did it against the Braves, and that's about as impressive a start as you can have. What's our state of the union on Garrett Crochet right now?
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't know that the depth of the pitch mix is there. I don't love the team context. I love everything I've seen in terms of the results early on. So I think there will be inconsistencies, and I think people should expect inconsistencies in some starts that, that don't look great, but the command has been there. We have just seen that like fastball velocity only gets you so far. So I'd like to see, after like another start, we can start to see a little bit more of the data on like the shape of his pitches. I need to look into that a little bit more. Like how flat is the fastball? Does he keep it up in the zone? What is the shape of the fastball that might make it less hittable? I don't think you're upset about this at all, but I don't expect a season without hiccups is what I would say. So I would encourage you to stay patient when those hiccups do come. You had a reliever strategy.
Yeah, it's real basic. Somebody gets a save, and you can tell yourself a story that he's in line to be a primary closer for that team. It's not one of those, lefty specialist one out saves or something like that. You can see somebody maybe taking the job and running with it. You have to act. And Michael Kopech, again, White Sox are not a team I'm looking to get invested in, but we've all known another pedigree guy, a failed starter. So many great relievers are guys who couldn't make it in the rotation, and we're finally seeing that. Now, he did have it wasn't the easiest save. It was a multiple inning save. There was a home run. There was a ninth inning rally, but he did it against the Braves. And possession, it's 9/10 is the law. It's pretty close to 9/10 of the world in fantasy baseball.
Yeah.
If you're the guy in the ninth inning, if they're pressing your button, it's not that hard to hold a 3-run lead in the ninth inning. Now, granted, again, Kopech had the working man save. He came in the eighth inning and against one of the better teams in baseball. So this was a high difficulty save, but he did convert it. Only 28. And I told myself, Eric, we just talked a little bit about Crochet. I told myself this year I wasn't going to talk myself into the White Sox. That for years I was like, at some point Eloy has to put it together, and I know Moncada is better than this. And I said, no, I'm done with that stuff. I'm not talking myself into White Sox. And then Crochet pitched really well. And I'm talk myself into that. Maybe I just like watching their games. Steve Stone is really good. He does excellent breakdowns, but I think Kopech has to go on your wire. Give me your take on the White Sox or anything related to Kopech.
I think talk yourself into like a few guys, right? That was their first win. I'm not overly excited. Kopech to me is like, he's throwing as hard as he can. He has no idea where the ball's going. I watched that. It was just like, there were some pitches missed by a lot. He's just, he's a new reliever, and he's just rearing back every time he throws. He's like talking to himself on the mound. Like there's a lot of head case stuff going on. I've added Kopech a lot of places. I think he has the potential to be a really good reliever. So I'm happy to pick him up. The White Sox beat writers have said the White Sox are trying to boost his trade value. If he can succeed in the bullpen, they think they could get
what all losing teams should do is get a bunch of saves up there and then take it to market in June or July.
I think that the chances of him sticking as a closer for the full season are slim, because either he loses the job because he's not good with the White Sox, or he does well and he gets traded to a contending team that probably already has a closer, again, injury dependent, and uses Kopech as a good high leverage inning guy in the 7th, 8th, multi innings, whatever it is. So I'd be adding him, but I wouldn't be expecting you're going to get some surprise 25 save season out of it. So
Fair.
if you add him and he goes on a run, maybe you also look to trade him.
And you trade him. He's a flip guy for sure.
That thinks that he's a full-time closer. My only pushback on your rule is I try to put myself in at the end of a draft. I try to put myself in a position where I don't have to chase saves on the wire. Where if I want to put a bid on a Kevin Ginkel, a Jason Foley, a Michael Kopech, I can, but I don't need to go crazy in order to get those bids. And I don't have to spend tons of money, because there are guys that you wind up chasing where, yes, your idea that like there's a clear line for saves, go add them. But what if the blowups are there too? Like I think of like right now, Will Smith and Justin Lawrence look to have clear paths for saves in Kansas City and Colorado, respectively. If you really need saves, you could take a chance on those guys. We've seen Will Smith be a really good left-handed reliever for a while. Justin Lawrence was solid last year. They both are so scary in terms of what they'll do to your ratios that I just wouldn't go aggressive on those guys. I would put small bids in and be willing to move on from them really quickly. I don't want to pay top dollar on the waiver wire for a closer, because he's a closer if the only thing he's going to give me is saves, and he's going to hurt other categories, and then may not even get saves throughout the whole season. You know what I mean? So like for me, that was part of the reason I avoided Alex Lang. He is no longer the closer. Tanner Scott has a little bit of those alarm bells, right? The walks in the first start did not look good. You and I have talked about that with Jose Leclerc, right? That he is a disaster. It could be a potential disaster. Will Smith, Justin Lawrence. I would go tepidly on like a guy like Kyle Finnegan, right? I don't know how good he is. I think Hunter Harvey is good. So like there are spots like that where, yes, those guys that I mentioned look like they're primed to have a runway of saves, but I wouldn't overexpose yourself, or I wouldn't go too crazy in trying to pick guys like that up.
Yeah, let me amend the advice a little bit. I mean, maybe the point is you have to consider every save and ask yourself what it means. And in the case of when you're adding or considering adding a closer who you don't believe in long term, or the skills don't support him, you want to do what his real life team wants to do. You want to think about flipping him if you can, because there's usually somebody who's desperate in your league for saves if they're tradable pieces. You're going back to the Ron Chandler ethos of, you're drafting a lot of times. You're trying to draft skills, not the roles. And you want the skilled players, and you don't want. Now, the problem with saves is that it's a role thing. If you're just saves are all you count about, but you're all you care about. But as you mentioned, you have to look at the blow up potential with some of these guys, and ultimately that's going to chase you away from some of these players. Let me ask you about one other guy who's a quasi closer. I didn't get the first save for Oakland, but Mason Miller pitched late in the Red Sox game last night and was throwing pellets, man. He was throwing 101, 102, 103, much to the delight of my friend John Greco, who's a Boston guy who has some Mason Miller shares. I'm just curious where you see him going forward.
I love him. I think that he's the closer. I think there's some indications that he's pitching the highest leverage innings. I don't know how many saves Oakland's going to get, but I think he's the guy. And unlike some of those guys like Will Smith, Justin Lawrence, whatever,
we're betting on skills here.
I would much rather have Mason Miller, because even if he's not closing, I think I'm getting valuable skills. And even if that winds up just being strikeouts, like last night, 4 strikeouts and two shutout innings, like that is useful for you. That's helpful for your ratios. That's helpful for strikeouts. Maybe, that results in a sneaky win here or there. And that's if he doesn't become the closer. And I think that he will. So I think you get valuable strikeouts and innings and ratios. And I think even on a bad A's team, maybe you get 15 saves at the end of the season. And I think that winds up being just an incredibly valuable reliever. And where he was going in drafts, he could be your third reliever. So like you could get 2 guys that you felt pretty good about. Like maybe you got like Andres Munoz and Evan Phillips prior to the Sol series where his draft price rose ridiculously because he got those 2 saves. But like if you got 2 guys like that, and then you got Mason Miller, where I don't need him to get 25 saves. If he gets 10, I feel good in the saves category, but I'm getting all of the other production from him. I love Mason Miller, and that's where I think that Kopech could get to. Like, I think Kopech is a reliever who could be valuable for you, even if he's not getting saves, because I really do. I don't know that he has the ceiling of Mason Miller, but I think that he could be really valuable in 2 inning spurts where he strikes out 3, strikes out 4, picks up a sneaky win here or there. If he gets traded and is not the closer. So I still think you should go after Michael Kopech, even if we're suggesting he's not going to be the closer full time.
Just to put a cap on the save discussion also, even though I talked about reacting to every save, which you have to do, you have to at least think about it and have a plan. But the best fantasy managers, and this is again where the Chandler Chase skills idea really comes into play. And this is for any fantasy sport too, is you want to learn to master how to get this stuff at the lowest acquisition cost, not the highest acquisition cost. You want to be trying to add these guys before they're closers, before their value takes off. I mean, I know this sounds like painfully obvious, but it's the skilled fantasy players when they're making their fab offers, they're getting in at the bottom of the market. They're a week or 2 early on things versus oh my God, this thing just exploded. Now I got to blow 35% of my fab. I don't want, sometimes you have to do that. You play to your situation. I never want to play that way.
Yeah, I agree. I do love your last rule though. And I tried to scoop this exact guy you're using, and I got outbid in my home league.
Yeah, sometimes you see clusters of stolen bases where a guy seems to have this approach. Every time I'm getting on base, I'm stealing a base. And that's what Brice Turang has done. 4 games, 6 steals. He's got 7 hits. Now, this guy did not hit it all last year. He had limited power. He had a bad average. He didn't hit lefties. But he was a plus defender. He had a credible slash line in the minors. He's always been a really intelligent player, a very high percentage base stealer. And if he can just, we talked a lot about Anthony Volpe before the season, how that 209 average wasn't real. He does have actually decent plate discipline. He could be a decent offensive player if he just improves the average. And he's off to a terrific start and made a bunch of swing changes. And I think Volpe is maybe going to be a great player very soon. That's not how Brice Turang's a different guy. But when you steal 6 bases in 4 games, what do you get? A green light whenever you want. It's an era of stolen bases. And you might say, well, he doesn't really hit lefties. They don't want to start him against lefties. I've looked at the schedule. 9 of the next 10 games for Milwaukee is against a right-handed starter. And it's a right-handed world. And if Brice Turang can just nudge the average up a little bit, hit the occasional homer, he's going to steal 40 or 50 bases. I'm not worried at all about that. And the glove will keep him on the field. When my friend Joe Sheehan did his baseball rankings by positional group, the best offenses in baseball, the best pitching in baseball, the best defenses in baseball, he actually had Milwaukee number 1. I think some people might be surprised by that. Turang is part of that, a plus defender at a very key position. These are the cheapest 40 or 50 steals you're going to get. And I think there's a chance. He was a good offensive player in the minors, not a great offensive player, but I don't think he's necessarily the automatic out that he looked like last year. So I think the offense has a little bit of potential. But when I see somebody cluster stealing bases like that, there is the pinball move where I'll immediately hit the flipper and make the ad.
And you're buying in on the floor right now of him as a strong side platoon bat and nothing else. Like if he winds up then getting more playing time, you're adding even more value. But I fully agree with you. I'm looking right now on like the steals leaderboard just to see like who's running a lot in the early going. You have also Jarren Duran. So Brice Turang and Jarren Duran both have 6. Jose Siri is another guy we talked about. Where Jose Siri has 3 stolen bases and 2 caught stealing, including trying to steal third the other day. He said he wants to steal 30 bases. He's running every chance he gets. So there are things like that where like I even will sometimes look at caught stealing and like I don't want guys who are getting caught stealing, but if it's adding to their overall stolen base attempts, it's something I will monitor. I do see that the caught stealing leaderboard includes our boy Zach Neto, who's 0 for 2 on stolen bases to start the year.
Hey, at least he gets on base. Anthony Rendon never gets on base.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
In fact, I project Anthony Rendon to have a 0 OBP this year. Is that too extreme? Should I go lower? I guess you can't go lower.
It's not too extreme. Right on the money. We're going to talk about, speaking of bad players, we're going to talk about some good players, some cushy schedules. We're going to look at some good weekend schedules and some guys that maybe you could add if you have like Wednesday night waivers or midweek or daily waivers or things of that nature. Before we do that, just a reminder, though, that you can find all the episodes of the Rotoworld Baseball Show and all your favorite NBC sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports so you can check out the Rotoworld Baseball Show and all of our shows, including Monday's show, where Scott and I looked at some of our takeaways from opening weekend. We want to include schedules when you're looking at waiver pickups. It is a component. It doesn't have to be the only thing, right? Obviously, if you are streaming hitters, a schedule is incredibly important. If you're looking to add just value, you may find a really good hitter who's available on waivers, doesn't have a great schedule this week, but if you're looking to add him for the full season, you look at the schedule, but it doesn't deter you from adding a really valuable hitter. But we want to look at some clusters of good schedules. This weekend, the Tampa Bay Rays go to Colorado. Anytime any team is going to Coors, we certainly want to look at that. Tampa Bay is a platoon-heavy team. They're going to get 1 left-handed starter, and they're going to get 2 right-handed pitchers against the Rockies. So you're going to get 2 starts from some of the lefty-only guys, which makes Brandon Lau a little interesting. He gets 2 starts in Coors. He is 41% rostered in Yahoo formats. I know people don't love, his batting average isn't great, and they don't love that the Rays platoon. But again, 2 out of 3 in Coors. The potential for him to hit home runs. And then Jose Caballero is rostered in just 4% of leagues. I keep talking about this. He is their starting shortstop. Once in a while, they might let Ahmed Rosario play short so Caballero can get a day off, but Rosario is a bad shortstop. Caballero has 2 steals already on the year. His value is in stolen bases. But remember that Coors just isn't about power. Coors Field and hitting at altitude helps boost batting average as well. So a guy like Caballero, who maybe isn't a great hitter, but also doesn't strike out a bunch, could steal a few extra base hits. A few extra base hits means a few extra stolen base opportunities. And so you could look at like maybe 2 or maybe even 3 steals on the weekend for him. So that's somebody that I find interesting. Is there any hitter? This will be the first series for Colorado in Colorado on the season. They are set to face Zach Littell, Tyler Alexander, and Ryan Pepio. Littell and Pepio are righties. Alexander's a lefty. It's not, the murderer's row of starting pitching. Are there any Rockies hitters that you feel like you would be confident in going to add right now? Obviously, Nolan Jones and Ryan McMahon and Ezekiel Tovar are rostered pretty much everywhere. But is there anybody else you could see yourself adding?
And maybe you can make a short-term investment in Charlie Blackmon if he's available, but this is such a depressing Colorado team. This is the least exciting Rockies. And I played fantasy all through the entire existence of the Colorado Rockies. I've never been less excited about their offense than I am this year. And the great thing about stacking against them in Colorado, as you mentioned, the park's huge. So it's not just the home runs. It's more about the cheap hits. But they don't have any good pitching. I mean, Arizona beat up their pitching at regular elevation. I joked on Twitter that every team should schedule the Rockies for homecoming. I mean, it's just, they have 55 wins written all over them. So Tampa Bay can be a little bit of a pain in the neck because they're one of those 162 lineup cards for 162 games. They do different things every day. They love to platoon. They love to shift guys around. There's only 3 or 4 players I feel like we know are going to play every day, but you have to try to take advantage of these opportunities when they come. And then after that series, it's Arizona next week. So let's try to be proactive and pick on the Rockies where we can.
I would add Brendan Rodgers, who's under 50% rostered in Yahoo formats. He's starting every day and hitting second. He hasn't been hitting great at the start of the year, but again, a Rocky player you could add in there. I was looking at these Reds roster rates, and I don't understand it. I know that, in Yahoo, we got a lot of 8-team leagues. We got 10-team leagues. We got leagues of all shapes and sizes. And so, there are some players who we think when we cover like deeper leagues, but I can't believe this guy's rostered so low. I do think that like the first guy I'm going to talk about here should be well over 50%, and I assume will be soon. But the Reds go home this weekend and they face the Mets, and they face Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, and the spot occupied by Tyler McGill, whether it's Jose Budo or Mike Vasil or whatever. The Mets pitching staff is not good. The Reds hitting environment is a great hitting environment. Will Benson is only 31% rostered. That needs to be way higher. He hits second for the Reds when they face righties. He has remained in the lineup when they face lefties. And yes, I know he's hitting 9th, but he's playing literally every single day. He has power. He has speed against a bad pitching team. Really, it's not just rotation, just pitching team outside of Edwin Diaz closing games. Benson needs to be on so many rosters for the weekend. And then also Jake Fraley, who will sit against lefties but play versus those 2 right-handed pitchers, is available in 25% of leagues. He hits 5th for the Reds against righties. In the middle of the lineup, has power, has speed, in a good park. Again, these are guys I think we need to add for the weekend.
Yeah, Benson's one of the more underrated players in baseball right now. He is a former first-round pick on his pedigree, and as you said, he's high up in the lineup against right-handed pitching. They do face a handful of lefties in the next week, but he's still going to be in the lineup. Power and speed category juice that drives so many of our fantasy decisions. He's grossly under-rostered, and I keep trying to find room for him in the leagues that I'm in where he is available, and it's just I have other needs or he just doesn't fit my roster shape. And you spoke very well about how there are different sizes of Yahoo leagues, and that sometimes explains a tag that doesn't make sense to us. But even with that disclaimer, I feel like by the end of the month, his roster ship is going to go up by like 20 or 30%. He's a good player, and the injuries have taken a nebulous situation and given him basically a full-time job.
Yeah. And also just breaking news. That Mets start on Sunday may be made by Julio Teheran, who the team just signed. Julio Teheran was in camp with the Orioles in spring training and didn't make the team and opted out. And so the Mets brought him in, but he has been pitching throughout spring training. So there's a thought that maybe he jumps in. Listen, he hasn't really been good since 2019. He had a 4.40 ERA and 71 2/3 innings with the Brewers last year. This isn't somebody I'm encouraging you to pick up, and it's not somebody who deters from my desire to start Reds this weekend. But again, just a note that it might be him.
Man,
I would also
I love Turang. Once upon a time, I really loved that guy,
sure,
but it was a while. It was a good solid decade ago, but
yeah, there were some really good years, and I mean, listen, a 2.89 ERA and 221 innings for the Braves in 2014. You can't really beat that. I would also mention, listen, everybody loved to make jokes about Nick Martini on opening day, because like he was the opening day hero who wasn't going to do this, but
Duffy Rhodes.
he does hit for the Reds against righties. He does have power. He doesn't really strike out a lot. The Reds are going to face 2 righties this weekend. So in your deeper formats, Nick Martini's only 13% roster right now. He could be worth a pickup for this weekend series. He really could be worth a pickup whenever the Reds are at home and facing a slew of righties, until TJ Friedl comes back, because he's not going to do what he did opening day, but he could always, get you some home runs and a steal, or, not a steal or 2, but a couple, RBIs, base hits, things like that. The Phillies go to Washington. The Nationals are a team that we currently like to pick on. Their pitching staff is not particularly good. We think their team is potentially one of the worst in baseball. The Phillies will face 2 lefties this weekend, Mackenzie Gore and Patrick Corbin. Most of the right-handed hitters on the Phillies are rostered. However, Whit Merrifield is only 32% rostered. He has been playing a little bit more recently. I think that Whit Merrifield will be in the lineup for those 2 starts against lefties. And that's something that, again, not in every format, but in deeper formats, 12 team with big rosters, 15 team leagues, I think Whit Merrifield, in a good ballpark against a bad pitching team is worth an ad for your weekend.
Yeah, and so versatile on defense. Not that he's a great defender, but he can be adequate at several different positions. So it doesn't take a lot to imagine Merrifield may end the season with like 550 at bats.
Mm-hmm.
He could be a useful. I think he might be in the area where he's a more useful fantasy player this year than he is a real life player. And the Phillies, man, their defense is really hard to watch, but
yes,
they're still a show. I mean, the Harper show last night was so much fun, and Turner is so great. And any piece of this lineup, I'm an Alex Boehm fan. There's just so many hitters here I like. And I think Merrifield, certainly for this weekend, I think he may be somebody you add temporarily, and then in a deeper league, you end up maybe hold on to for a longer period of time.
Possibly. And in real deep leagues, there's also Brandon Marsh, who's only 4% rostered, who did start on Monday versus a lefty. So he's not going to sit versus all lefties. So there's a chance he starts 2 of the 3 games this weekend. Off to a solid start to the year so far, actually. He's 5 for 14 with 2 home runs and 1 steal already on the year. Brandon Marsh has always had a little bit of power speed. So again, in deeper formats, maybe you add him and you might actually hold him for a little bit, because again, he's playing regularly in a good lineup. The Orioles, face 2 lefties in Bailey Falter and Marco Gonzalez when they face the Pirates. There's just not a lot of opportunity to take here. Most of the Orioles starters are added or on rosters. Most of the Orioles right-handed starters in particular, like you're not picking up a Ryan O'Hearn when they're facing 2 lefties. The only name I'll add here is Ramon Urias, who plays every day against left-handed pitching and is playing most of the days, batting 9th for the Orioles. He's 1% rostered. Again, we're talking super deep leagues. The only piece of the Orioles lineup you can probably pick off of waivers right now is Ramon Urias at 1% rostered. Your Detroit Tigers are going to get to face the Oakland Athletics this weekend. They get 1 lefty in JP Sears and then 2 righties. I'm still pounding the table for Parker Meadows, 21% rostered. I know he hasn't gotten off to the great start, but I think that there's a lot of talent there. Are there any other Detroit Tigers that we should be, attacking for this A's series?
Yeah, the only buzzkill here, as you said, the offense hasn't really clicked yet. It's been mostly about the pitching, but AJ Hinch is a great manager, but he's running out 4 platoons right now. Meadows, Carpenter, Keith, and McKinstry are all on the better side of the platoons. And then you have guys on their bench who are going to be utilized in play. So they're kind of Tampa Bay. You have to look at every lineup and you have to plan for them. They're almost like a chore you have to do, like taking out the trash. You have to monitor these guys every day.
Yeah,
you have to water them and plant the seed and all that. I don't know. I'd like to see some of these players. Colt Keith eventually is going to be a full-time player. And I think Parker Meadows eventually is going to be a full-time player. Is that this year? I don't know. But I was hoping, and Carpenter's a little bit frustrating for me because I was hoping he would get to 600 at bats. And I feel like if he's in a platoon, that just isn't possible. So sometimes injuries fix this. Sometimes a performance is so good that a player earns full-time at bats. But with some of your younger talent, especially, I mean, they think they signed Keith to the long-term extension.
Right.
Let him play all the time.
Yeah, I think they will for the most part. Like Keith has played against some lefties, but I think it'll settle a little bit. I'm confused what they're doing at third base. They're playing everybody, so who knows? The Red Sox are another team we want to capitalize on. They're playing the Angels. Most of the Red Sox are rostered. Ceddanne Rafaela is now over 50% rostered in Yahoo, but I'll just mention his name. He's hitting 5th today against Oakland. He's still hitting kind of like 5, 6, 7 range, depending on the lineup they run out there. I understand he's not crushing the ball, but rookie in the lineup every day is worth a roster with that kind of speed. If you're in really deep leagues, and Manuel Valdez is playing second base for the Red Sox every single day against right-handed pitching. They're going to see 2 righties this weekend, so that's somebody you could get to just have exposure to the Red Sox lineup, which I'd probably honestly rather get exposure to Ramon Urias in that lineup than I would in Manuel Valdez. But again, depending on your league types, you may not have that luxury. And the question I want to end this episode for you is, like, we talk about attacking certain teams, and there's probably a level where we decide, I don't know that I want to go there. And I wonder if we're there this weekend because we like playing hitters against the White Sox. And I think we're going to like playing hitters against the Royals, but those teams are playing against each other this weekend. And it turns out that in 2 of those 3 games, I kind of like some of the pitchers that are going. The Royals are going to face Eric Fetty and the aforementioned Garrett Crochet. So we know that Crochet looks really good and is going to be, you don't really want hitters against him on the Royals, but Fetty looked pretty good in that first start. The White Sox hitters, who we don't love in general, are going to face Brady Singer, who you just talked about, looked great in his first start, and Michael Wacha, who also looked good in his first start and isn't like oh my God, he's a stud, but is really good at inducing soft contact, doesn't really get like lit up a lot. So my question to you is, when you see a situation like this, do you still say, you know what, these are 2 teams I usually like hitting against, so I'm going to find somebody? Or do you just say, I don't love the offenses, I don't love the matchups, I know that I should want to be in on this, but I'm going to put my hands up and move on?
I'll use the traffic light system. Crochet to me is a red light matchup for hitters. Singer's probably yellow light, and I can actually go green light on Fetty and Wacha.
Ooh, okay. I guess we'll see. I would go yellow. I'm yellow light on Fetty and Wacha. I actually have probably more faith in Fetty and Wacha than I do in Singer. Of the 3, I think I have the most faith in Wacha. I think since Wacha has become super changeup dependent, he's really been a pretty solid starting pitcher. He isn't he's not a great fantasy pitcher because he's not racking up lots of strikeouts, but he's not a great pitcher to go against. And I don't love a lot of the bats in Chicago anyway. So it wouldn't be something I would definitely want to attack. If you're on the side of Scott, I would say that a guy like Gavin Sheets, who is playing pretty much every day at DH now that Eloy Jimenez is sidelined, would be somebody where, like, if you're looking for a left-handed bat for the White Sox, he could be a guy to fill in this weekend. Though my personal preference is to avoid.
Before we go, I want to ask you a trivia question. Do you know Eric, who leads the major leagues in games played, plate appearances, runs scored, hits, triples, home runs, RBIs, walks, batting average, OBP, and slugging, which means he leads the league in OPS, of course. Those are all those things combined, OPS plus, and total bases. Who am I?
I don't know. Who are you?
Mookie.
I mean, I do know the answer because you told
Mookie
me
Lynn Betts, yes. MLB headed steamrolling towards his second MVP. I know he has the 8 games, but so do all of his teammates. So do all of the Padres. Should Mookie Betts have been the second overall pick in fantasy drafts this year? Did we screw this up? Yeah, maybe. I just like talking about Mookie Betts. You can't pick up Mookie Betts. You can't trade for Mookie Betts. You can just watch him and enjoy him. But hey, I'm here for that.
Perfect. And we're here for you again next week for more episodes of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. You can follow me on Twitter at SamskiNYC. You can follow Scott on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. Have a great weekend of baseball, and we'll see you next week.